It seems like every day is a new headline about a massive brand that has decided to adjust their operations and move to a fully distributed workforce. Brands like Twitter, Square, Shopify, Box, Quora, and even Fujitsu have gone fully remote. Brands like Facebook, Slack, HubSpot, Atlassian, and Zillow now have remote working as an option. Now, while these brands are making the headlines as they make that transition, they too are trying to figure out how best to navigate this new territory. Well, if you're anything like me, then you don't want the opinions of a thought leader. You want proven tactics from someone who has navigated that specific challenge. Well, in this video, I sit with, in my opinion, the authority on building a fully remote workforce, because he built his company from day one to be fully distributed and now has over 1,300 employees spread out across the globe. He has perfected it, and he shares with us how he did it. Hello, I'm James McKinney, the creator and host of the Startup Story podcast and founder of the newest entrepreneurial subscription, Grindology. Every week, I sit with a successful founder to unpack their entrepreneurial journey that led them to build the incredible businesses and brands that they have. And with over 100 episodes and almost 100,000 listeners across the UK, Australia, and the United States, we have been fortunate to have some of the most amazing founders join the show. And just recently, I had the chance to speak with Matt Mullenweg, the co-founder of WordPress and CEO of Automattic. Now, you might be thinking, oh, the founder of WordPress, that's pretty cool. And you're right, it is pretty cool. But let me hype it up just a bit more for you, because his full episode of the Startup Story might be the best 60 minutes of your week. Now, regardless of your technical background, your technical knowledge, you are probably aware of WordPress and that it's a CMS platform that can help you establish a website online. But did you know that WordPress powers over 30% of the internet? Now let me repeat that and rephrase it for you. 1 out of every 3 websites on the internet is built using WordPress. How insane of a statistic is that? Yet, what is equally remarkable is that he has built Automattic to a current state that now employs over 1,300 people without any centralized office. Every single person works remotely. His entire episode is worth listening to, and there's a link below for easy access. But there was one segment of our discussion where he shared the early tools he utilized when building a distributed workforce, as well as his current tools. We also discuss how he manages culture and teams when everyone is fully remote, as well as some key advantages and considerations to fully remote workforce. And it is those tactics that I knew I had to share with you in this video. Throughout this video, Matt mentions various sites and resources that he has created on this very topic. And to make it easy for you, we have included those links and resources in the show notes of his episode. So just click the link below to access his episode and those resources. But before we jump into this segment, I highly suggest that you watch to the very end of the video, as I have a special offer to have your business highlighted in an upcoming episode of The Startup Story. Now let's hear direct from Matt Mullenweg, the co-founder of WordPress and CEO of Automattic, on the tools, tactics, advantages, and considerations when moving to a fully remote workforce.
I'll start by saying that this is a deep topic that I dive into very deeply on my blog and podcast at distributed.blog. So I'll give you the basics here, but if you want to go deeper, check out some of the interviews there. And the latest was actually with Jack Dorsey, talking about the transition at Square and Twitter to distributed. And I also have lots of pages of resources, like the best equipment to buy, the best software to use, etc. Early days, when Automattic started, it was very similar to everything we do today, except it was like worse versions of it. So the version 1 or 2. So Slack, a lot of people don't know this, was actually modeled on IRC. So the way that the channels work with the hashtag in front and things like that was all based on IRC. So we used IRC, which stood for Internet Relay Chat. And think of it like a lo-fi text-only version of Slack, but with a lot of the same great features. Instead of GitHub for code collaboration and issue tracking, there was and Git. There were earlier versions called Subversion or CVS that were kind of source control sharing, and there was an open source site called SourceForge that you could kind of collaborate online, and that's what most open source projects used at the time. So we had kind of our equivalent of GitHub that was early. For voice communication, we did that very rarely, but Skype was already there. You know, AIM and ICQ were pretty popular chat platforms, so we'd use that a lot, or Skype. We didn't do any video. Like, both bandwidth, cameras, and the tools were just not worth it. In fact, Automatic basically didn't do any video meetings until Zoom started. And Zoom was the first thing, even after we never really used Google Hangouts or anything. They just weren't that good. But when Zoom took off, we were actually very, very early adopters of both Slack, Zoom, a lot of the tools that have become very popular. Which is why we now invest in them, because a lot of things that we early adopt, I think, are going to become bigger. Where we're at now is, the kind of operating system of the company is Slack for real-time chat. We use either Zoom or Google Hangouts for videos or meetings. We love Google Docs and all the kind of G Suite tools. They're really fantastic. We don't use email at all. So instead of email, we have an internal blogging system called P2. So the letter P as in pool and the number 2. If you go to wordpress.com/P2, you can set a private one up for your company. It's a really cool, think of it almost like an internal Twitter or Facebook for your company, where people can share what's going on, comment on it, and it gives you a very rich history and decision tree for all the things that are happening within your company. And when someone new joins, they can just read the old blog post instead of trying to catch up with old emails or wikis or things like that. And that's kind of what we run the whole company on. P2 is probably our secret sauce. We consider Slack ephemeral, and you don't need to even use it as part of your job. It's just there for convenience. If something's important, we always put it on the P2. When we could, in pre-pandemic times, we would do meetups. So we would bring together teams a few times a year. So we'd fly everyone from wherever they were in the world, get like an Airbnb or something. And for small teams, which were typically most teams in Automatic are under 10 people, they would just, all stay in the same house and work and eat together and cook together and everything for a week. And that would really build the trust. So when they returned to their distributed work, they would kind of have that, know what someone's laugh was like, or their sense of humor, or their tone of voice, which allows you to read the text that they're writing in a kinder way, really. And then once a year, we would bring the whole company together in what we called the Grand Meetup. And that was a little bit more like a conference, because it got to be 800 or 1,000 people. But we kind of take over a hotel, do talks, bring in speakers, have like lots of different tracks people could choose, like do a hackathon or do customer support or take classes or teach a class. And that was always really fun. Automatic definitely over-indexes for hiring people who aren't just supremely talented, but really nice. It's really one of the number one things people say after they work here. Even people who resign, comment on how friendly their colleagues are. And that's, so when we get together, it's really, really great. And it's almost like a family reunion, even if maybe someone would get on your nerves if you had to sit next to them every day of the year. If you're only going to see them a week or two a year, you can totally put up with pretty much anything, and you really appreciate that time a lot more.
What were some things when you spoke with Jack Dorsey as when Twitter announced they were going to go fully distributed? Again, you're the expert. Whether he came to you or not looking for advice before the decision, no idea, somewhat irrelevant. But what would you say to someone who is now looking at this idea, like, do we stay fully distributed, or do we come back to the workspace once things start opening up? How would you, what things would you tell someone to be heavily considerate of when it comes to working fully remote?
Yeah. The number one thing that the pandemic allowed us all to learn was, I think, so many people assumed that creating innovative, high volume, high scale products, or whatever it was that they thought they were doing, could only be done with people in an office. And once that became impossible, we kind of figured it out, right? And Automatic had done that a long time ago, but maybe they thought, if you're going to do like blogging software, it's fine. But if you need to make like an iPhone, you have to be in the same room or something like that. And we kind of figured out where that was true or not. Maybe for some things, like doing industrial design for the iPhone, you do need to have the prototypes and the special machines. But maybe building iOS, you don't need to be in the same room. And the other thing is a lot of people got the taste of the autonomy and flexibility that working from home, working from anywhere, or working in a more asynchronous fashion opens up in their lives. And once you have a taste of that freedom, it's hard to return to your previous state. Much like any type of freedom, right? Much like democracy. So I think that the companies, Microsoft, Twitter, Square, Facebook has a version of this, that have said they are going to support people working from anywhere indefinitely, are going to be more competitive. So in the talent market in technology is incredibly competitive. So if you've had the taste of working from home, you enjoy it, and Apple's telling you need to go back to an office, and you're now seeing your commute times come back, or all the things, the trade-off of the small house you had to live in to avoid the commute. I think they're going to lose talent to companies that are both doing distributed work and then companies that are good at it. So I have this framework that I encourage people to Google. It's called the 5 levels of distributed autonomy. And that talks about like essentially how you get good at distributed work. And it's a useful framework. A lot of companies, even the big ones who are doing it by force, are doing distributed work kind of poorly. They're still forcing people to be in too many meetings, and people are getting Zoom fatigue, and they're not doing their best work. If you do it right, people are actually able to be more creative, more productive, more innovative than they ever would have been in an office. And it sounds impossible, but we probably thought a lot of the things we've done in the past year were impossible.
I hope you found this content helpful, and if you did, then please make sure to subscribe to the Startup Story podcast on your podcast platform of choice so that you can hear Matt's entire episode. With over 100 founder interviews to choose from, I am confident you will find many that will be helpful to your entrepreneurial journey. I mentioned earlier that I have a special offer for you to promote your brand or business within the Startup Story podcast. And this offer requires nothing from you except your time. In every episode of the Startup Story, I read a listener review from Apple Podcasts. And if you visit the Startup Story show page within Apple Podcasts and leave a written review, I will read it in an upcoming episode. And here's the best part. If you insert your URL, social media accounts, or company name within that review, then when I read your review in an episode of the Startup Story, your brand or URL will be inserted into the Startup Story and live on for years to come. It's basically a free advertisement for your business or brand within the Startup Story. I hope you'll subscribe to the show as well as follow us on all the many social media platforms. I say it in every episode because I believe it in my very being. Entrepreneurs support other entrepreneurs, and we're here to support you.